The 1960s and 70s were an age of collecting. Marbles, PEZ, charms, and tiny treasures that turned ordinary days into adventures, some becoming icons while others vanished without a trace. Today, we're revisiting 25 childhood collectibles that defined a generation, why kids loved them, why they disappeared, and the nostalgia they still spark.
Wacky packages stickers.
These weren't just stickers, they were tiny, rebellious works of art. Kids in the 1960s and 70s were obsessed with wacky packages. Those cheeky parody stickers that mocked popular products of the day. Toothpaste became Crust. Cereal became Cap'n Crud. And kids couldn't get enough of trading, peeling, and sticking them everywhere. Lunchboxes, notebooks, even bedroom doors. At first glance, it looked like harmless fun. In reality, it was much more. A snapshot of the decade's humor and counterculture spirit. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Kids proudly collected full sets, competing with friends and hunting for rare stickers. Today, these goofy parodies have mostly vanished from playgrounds, but for those who grew up with them, they remain a badge of childhood mischief.
Pet rocks.
Only in the 1970s could a smooth stone become a nationwide craze. Pet rocks were sold in little cardboard boxes with air holes, complete with a care manual that explained how to feed, train, and love your new companion. Kids proudly showed them off, traded them, and gave them names, because somehow it felt like more than just a rock. Behind the style was a hidden story about the decade itself. This was the 70s at its finest, playful, a little silly, and endlessly creative. At first glance, it looked practical, just a stone. In reality, it was much more. A symbol of how the decade turned even the simplest thing into a pop culture phenomenon. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade as one of the quirkiest fads in history. Troll dolls. Few toys scream 60s and 70s nostalgia like troll dolls. With their wild neon hair, wide-eyed grins, and slightly mischievous look, they became a must-have collectible. Kids lined them up on shelves, carried them to school, and even believed they brought good luck. For families, it was just normal life. But today it feels strange. Their charm was obvious, but so were the problems. That hair tangled fast, and losing one meant tears. At first glance, they looked like simple toys. In reality, they were much more. A cultural icon that captured the era's love of quirky, feel-good fun. These dolls came in different sizes and outfits, turning collecting into an adventure. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but seeing one today instantly transports you back to bell-bottoms, lava lamps, and Saturday morning cartoons. Mood rings. Mood rings were pure 70s magic, or at least that's how they felt. Slip one on your finger, and the stone would change color based on your mood. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. A tiny science experiment you could wear. Kids compared colors at recess, wondering if blue really meant happy, or if green meant relaxed. This detail says more about the 70s than you might expect. It was an era fascinated by self-discovery, and mood rings fit perfectly with that vibe. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. They didn't always work, and sometimes they just turned black. Still, owning one made you feel like you were in tune with your emotions. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but mood rings still define that 70s curiosity. Garbage Pail Kids, early versions. Before they became a full-blown 80s craze, early Garbage Pail Kids trading cards were already turning heads in the late 70s. These parody cards took the sweetness of Cabbage Patch Kids and twisted it into gross, hilarious caricatures. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Kids couldn't get enough of the weird humor, boogers, slime, and over-the-top gags that drove parents crazy. At first glance, they looked like silly collectibles. In reality, they were much more. A cheeky rebellion against the polished toys of the decade. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Some schools even banned them. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, But spotting an old card today instantly brings back that mix of laughter, shock, and childhood mischief.
Happy face buttons.
Nothing captured 70s optimism like the classic yellow happy face button. Simple, bright, and impossible to miss, it became a universal symbol of good vibes. Kids pinned them to their backpacks, denim jackets, and even lunchboxes. Behind the style was a hidden story about the decade itself. It wasn't just a cute design. It was a response to a turbulent time, spreading positivity when the world felt chaotic. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more a tiny badge of hope you could wear. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. It quickly became overused and commercialized. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But spotting one today still makes you smile and think of bell-bottom jeans, disco balls, and a simpler kind of happiness. Banana seat bike accessories. If you had a banana seat bike in the 60s or 70s, the accessories were everything. Streamers on the handlebars, tall sissy bars, and colorful reflectors turned an ordinary ride into a rolling work of art. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Kids would spend entire Saturdays customizing their bikes, racing through neighborhoods, showing off their latest upgrades. At first glance, it looked practical. A seat designed for comfort. In reality, it was much more. It became the symbol of freedom and individuality for a whole generation. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. The tall sissy bars could be dangerous, and crashes were memorable. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But seeing one today instantly brings back the rush of summer afternoons and scraped knees. Bottle caps. Bottle caps candy was a 70s lunchbox legend. Tiny discs, shaped like soda bottle caps, packed with fizzy flavor. They came in cola, root beer, orange, grape, and cherry, and kids would trade them like currency during recess. This detail says more about the 70s than you might expect. At first glance, they looked simple, just chalky candy. In reality, they were much more. A way to enjoy your favorite soda without buying a drink. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Sometimes the flavors were weirdly bitter, and they'd crumble in your pocket if you weren't careful. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But spotting a pack today instantly takes you back to trading snacks under the bleachers and trying to save your favorite flavor for last. Mad Magazine Spy versus Spy Cutouts. For kids in the 60s and 70s, Mad Magazine was pure mischief, and nothing was cooler than the Spy versus Spy cutouts hidden inside. Two sneaky spies, one in black and one in white, locked in endless battles of traps, tricks, and explosions. Behind the style was a hidden story about the decade itself. These cutouts let kids take the rivalry off the page, building their own paper traps and scenarios. At first glance, it looked like a silly comic. In reality, it was much more a playful reflection of Cold War tensions disguised as humor. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Scissors, glue, and tiny paper pieces everywhere. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But flipping through an old Mad today still makes you laugh and plot spy revenge.
45 RPM record adapters.
If you grew up in the 60s or 70s, you definitely knew the little plastic insert that fit inside 45 RPM records. Without it, your favorite single just spun uselessly on the turntable. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. This tiny adapter was the key to weekend dance parties and late-night radio sing-alongs. Kids would collect them in different colors, sometimes turning them into necklaces or keychains. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Lose one, and your record collection was stuck until you found a replacement. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but spotting one today instantly brings back the sound of the needle dropping, the crackle of vinyl, and the joy of hearing your favorite song play for the very first time.
Matchbook covers.
In the 60s and 70s, matchbook covers were more than just a way to light a cigarette. They were mini pieces of art you could collect. Restaurants, motels, bowling alleys, and roadside diners printed their names, logos, and even jokes on them. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Kids loved grabbing them from counters, fascinated by the bright designs and clever slogans. At first glance, they looked practical, just fire starters. In reality, they were much more colorful souvenirs that told the story of where you'd been. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. They were easy to lose, and parents didn't always love kids playing with matches. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but collectors still treasure them as tiny windows into mid-century life. Baseball cards, Topps. No collection from the 60s and 70s was complete without Topps baseball cards. Kids ripped open wax packs, hoping to find their favorite players, or a rare rookie card. For families, it was just normal life. But today it feels strange. At first glance, they looked like simple trading cards. In reality, they were much more. A connection to heroes on the diamond, stats to memorize, and bragging rights to win on the playground. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Doubles piled up fast, and moms sometimes tossed whole shoe boxes full of cards during spring cleaning. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But holding one today still brings back the smell of bubblegum, dusty summer afternoons, and the thrill of pulling the perfect card from the pack. Comic book covers. Comic book covers of the 60s and 70s were vibrant, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. Heroes and villains leapt across the glossy pages, enticing kids to grab the latest issue at the corner store. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. At first glance, they looked like colorful artwork. In reality, they were much more. Portals to adventure, imagination, and storytelling that shaped childhoods. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Covers could tear, fade, or get lost in a pile of other collectibles. For families, it was just normal life, trading, reading, and debating favorite characters. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But holding a vintage comic today still sparks nostalgia, recalling the thrill of new adventures waiting behind every cover. Pez dispensers. Pez dispensers were a staple of 60s and 70s childhoods, turning candy into a collectible experience. Each whimsical character, from superheroes to cartoon favorites, held a tiny stack of colorful PEZ candies, ready to pop out with a flick of the head. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Kids collected, traded, and proudly displayed their growing lineup on shelves and desks. At first glance, they looked practical, a candy container. In reality, they were much more. A fun ritual, a way to express personality, and a conversation starter among friends. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Dispensers broke, toppled over, or got lost in toy bins. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but spotting one today instantly brings back sugar-fueled joy and the playful spirit of childhood.
Gum wrapper chains.
In the 60s and 70s, kids didn't just chew gum. They transformed the wrappers into long, colorful chains. Each wrapper, carefully folded and linked, became part of a growing masterpiece that stretched across classrooms, bedrooms, and playgrounds. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. At first glance, it looked like simple recycling. In reality, it was much more. A creative pastime, a way to show patience, skill, and a flair for artistry. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Chains could unravel, wrappers tore, and the project required endless chewing. For families, it was just normal life, collecting, folding, and connecting each piece. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but seeing a wrapper chain today evokes the fun, patience, and inventiveness of childhood. Green Army Men. Green Army Men were a 60s and 70s childhood staple. Tiny, solid-colored soldiers ready for epic battles across living room carpets and backyard battlefields. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Kids, lined them up, created forts, and imagined endless campaigns, turning ordinary afternoons into heroic adventures. At first glance, they looked practical, simple plastic toys. In reality, they were much more. A gateway to imagination, strategy, and social play with friends and siblings. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Legs snapped easily, and losing a few meant a smaller army for the next mission. For families, it was just normal life, organizing troops, staging battles, and cheering victories. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But spotting one today instantly transports you back to epic childhood campaigns and limitless imagination. Hot Wheels Redlines. Hot Wheels Redlines were the crown jewel of 60s and 70s toy car collections. Sleek, fast, and often painted in bold, metallic colors. Each car featured a distinctive red line along the wheels, a badge of authenticity and speed. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Kids raced them on orange tracks, compared collections, and imagined high-octane adventures without ever leaving their bedrooms. At first glance, they looked practical, just small toy cars. In reality, they were much more, symbols of status, creativity, and childhood obsession. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Tracks warped, paint chipped, and rivals often borrowed cars without asking. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But spotting a red line today instantly revs up memories of speed, competition, and playground bragging rights.
Viewmaster Reels.
Viewmaster reels were a window to faraway worlds in the 60s and 70s, letting kids explore mountains, oceans, and fictional adventures one stereoscopic image at a time. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Slip a reel into the viewer, click the lever, and the world unfolded in bright, 3D images that sparked imagination and storytelling. At first glance, it looked practical. Just a toy with pictures. In reality, it was much more. An educational tool, a travel companion, and a source of endless curiosity. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Reels could get lost, images scratched, and the novelty faded with time. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but holding one today instantly transports you to a universe of wonder and childhood discovery. Super Balls. Super Balls were a 60s and 70s playground obsession. Small, bouncy spheres that seemed to defy gravity. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Kids would toss them, watch them rebound off walls, and compete to see whose ball bounced the highest or farthest. At first glance, they looked practical, just a toy to pass the time. In reality, they were much more. A source of endless fun, competition, and sometimes chaos when a ball careened into a neighbor's window. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. They could bounce unpredictably, roll under furniture, or vanish into gutters. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but holding one today instantly brings back the thrill of high-energy afternoons, laughter, and the pure joy of watching physics in action. Yo-yos. Duncan. Duncan yo-yos were a classic 60s and 70s toy that challenged kids to master the art of skillful tricks. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. With a flick of the wrist, the yo-yo would spin down and return, mesmerizing friends and sparking friendly competitions. At first glance, it looked practical, just a simple toy. In reality, it was much more, a test of dexterity, patience, and creativity, turning playgrounds into stages for impressive routines. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Strings tangled, yo-yos snapped, and beginners often faced frustration before success. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But picking one up today instantly recalls afternoons of focus, triumph, and the satisfying click of a perfectly executed trick.
Plastic charms from gumball machines.
Plastic charms from gumball machines were tiny treasures that brightened the 60s and 70s childhood experience. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. For a few coins, kids received a small, colorful charm, from miniature animals to lucky symbols, tucked inside a clear gumball capsule. At first glance, they looked practical, just a toy or trinket. In reality, they were much more: collectible tokens of joy, sparking imagination, trades, and pride in rare finds. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Capsules could crack, charms got lost, and favorites were highly coveted. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But spotting one today instantly recalls the thrill of turning a coin, twisting the machine, and unveiling a tiny surprise that could make your day. Silly putty eggs. Silly putty eggs were a 60s and 70s childhood delight, tiny capsules that hid colorful, stretchable putty inside. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Kids would crack open the eggs to reveal a blob that could bounce, stretch, and even lift comic strip images off the page. At first glance, it looked practical, just a toy for squishing. In reality, it was much more: a tactile, creative, and endlessly entertaining experience that sparked curiosity and laughter. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Putty could stick to furniture, get lost under couches, or dry out if forgotten. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but holding silly putty today instantly revives the joy of squishy fun, silly experiments, and playful afternoons of pure imagination. Cracker Jack prizes. Cracker Jack prizes were tiny treasures tucked inside every box, turning snack time into a mini adventure in the 60s and 70s. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Kids eagerly tore open the caramel-coated popcorn, hoping to discover a toy, trinket, or collectible waiting inside. At first glance, it looked practical, just a small incentive. In reality, it was much more: a source of excitement, surprise, and imagination that could spark games, trades, and endless curiosity. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Prizes were often tiny, fragile, or easily lost. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But holding one today instantly recalls the thrill of discovery, the joy of small surprises, and afternoons filled with sweet, crunchy delight and playful anticipation. Lunchbox stickers. Lunchbox stickers were a colorful highlight of the 60s and 70s school days, turning plain metal or plastic lunchboxes into personalized works of art. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Kids collected, swapped, and proudly displayed stickers, featuring superheroes, cartoons, and catchy slogans, making lunchtime an extension of their personality. At first glance, they looked practical, just a simple decoration. In reality, they were much more: expressions of identity, friendship, and playful creativity that sparked conversations and connections. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Stickers peeled, faded, or got stuck in unexpected places. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. But spotting one today instantly brings back memories of schoolyard pride, lunchtime excitement, and the small joys of personalizing your world one sticker at a time.
Patches for denim jackets.
Patches for denim jackets were a must-have for kids and teens in the 60s and 70s, turning ordinary clothing into bold personal statements. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. From cartoon characters to band logos, each patch told a story, showcased interests, or marked membership in a club or trend. At first glance, they looked practical, just fabric sewn onto clothing. In reality, they were much more: symbols of creativity, individuality, and social expression that let wearers stand out in school halls or at the park. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Patches frayed, fell off, or clashed with other designs. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but spotting one today instantly recalls the pride, creativity, and youthful self-expression that defined a generation's style. Thanks for joining this nostalgic trip through childhood collectibles. Subscribe and stay tuned for the next adventure you definitely won't want to miss.